Right now, we're going to look at the different parts to a hurricane. In the image, you can see Hurricane Fran. This is a hurricane that made landfall in the eastern United States in 1996, but it's a nice picture, so I thought it would work well to show you the different parts. So this in the very center is probably the best known feature of a hurricane. This is the eye. So the eye is the very center, and it's a circular area of really calm winds and fairly broken clouds. So this is the area where you have all the air rising up, so it's really low pressure. But as the storm, if you're right where the eye makes landfall, all the wind will go one direction, and then when you're under the eye, the sky above you will be clear. There'll be a few clouds, maybe even birds chirping in the air. And then the rains get you from the other side. But it's a surprisingly calm area. And usually the formation of the eye is kind of a big point in the development of one of these storm systems. Now, just outside of that is what's known as the eye wall. And it really is kind of exactly like it sounds. It really is a wall, basically, of wind and of rain and of clouds that surround the eye. And this is also where you get the most intense winds and rainfall. And in some cases, you can get rain of up to 10 inches an hour sometimes in these. And I'll talk about a couple of storms that had pretty significant rainfall right along the eye wall. This is a picture of what it looks like. This is actually the eyewall of Hurricane Katrina. This was taken by the hurricane hunters. And we'll talk a little bit about those when we talk about mitigation and tracking of hurricanes. But basically, their job is to fly through hurricanes. And it's I think probably some of the most awesome flying skills ever, because they start at the edge of the storm where the winds are lower and all go in one direction. And then the further they get into the storm, the higher the winds are, and then the highest wind is going to be when they hit that eye wall. And once they break through it, all of a sudden they're in the eye with almost no wind whatsoever. They cross the eye, and then the wind smacks them at full force going the other direction. So it's pretty impressive, and they show a lot of pictures of eye walls though, because it's intimidating to see that wall surrounding such a kind of a calm center. Now, swirling out away from the hurricane are what's called the rain bands. So these are clouds that spiral around a hurricane and contain numerous thunderstorms. And the closer you get to the eye, the more intense it gets. So we want to kind of measure the width of the hurricane, including the tippity ends of those rain bands. These can span really long distances. If you look at this picture of Hurricane Fran, it's going to reach basically from Cuba all the way up the eastern seaboard. In the Atlantic Ocean, one of the record holders was Hurricane Olga in 2001. And that hurricane was actually 990 miles wide, which is pretty amazing. Now, in the yellow that you can see here, that is I put that in to show you which direction that the storm is moving, because these hurricanes move through the Atlantic, and from wherever they form, and usually make a big curve up across that kind of mirrors the eastern coast of the U.S. Sometimes it, knocks into it, but not always. A lot of hurricanes, even really big ones, form. They just sort of skirt by, and maybe the coast gets a little bit of that rain bands. So having the eye go directly over you isn't the only way to be affected by one of these. But a hurricane is usually going to move at about 10 miles an hour. But a lot of that has to do with the water temperature and other effects around there. One of the scariest things is when a hurricane sort of slows down through a warm water pocket, like some of those warm eddies that form in the Gulf of Mexico, because that's a great way for it to strengthen up as it goes. Now, when we're talking about winds, in the hurricane in general, your strongest winds and your fastest winds, and also the highest storm surge. And we're going to talk about winds and storm surge as well in another video. But all of those are highest on the front right leading edge of northern hemisphere hurricanes. And that's because the winds are moving. So on the east side of the storm, the winds are spinning at like, I don't know, we'll say 100 miles an hour. And on the western side, they're spinning at 100 miles an hour. But if you factor in the direction that the storm is moving, it's moving at 10 miles an hour. So the combination of those two means that eastern side, the wind is actually blowing at about 110 miles an hour, whereas on the western side, it actually weakens a little bit, and you've got winds at only 90 miles an hour. And so this is the first time I'd ever heard this term used, but with the landfall of Hurricane Laura just in the last couple of weeks of this 2020 hurricane season, I heard some of the meteorologists referring to that eastern side of the storm as the dirty side. And it's because it plays dirty, and it treats the people in their homes pretty dirty, because that tends to be where the most damage is, not necessarily where the eye crosses, but directly east or north, depending on kind of the angle of incident of the storm there. But on that right side of the Atlantic storms are the dirty side.